welcome back to Sinews of War. In the last episode, as part of our waging of war against France, we were raiding their ports with our fleet sailing out of Amsterdam. We were also warring against the pirates, and in Madagascar I ganged up 3 small ships to take on their larger ship. It was a daring battle with close range broadsides being used, but in the end we defeated the pirate menace, which meant Madagascar was once again ours to control. In Guiana, the French attacked and I deployed reinforcements to try and stop their advance. The enemy had lots of native troops who I underestimated. They proved powerful at range and powerful in melee. We managed to surround them and eventually get them to break, but with heavy losses. We landed all of our forces from Amsterdam in France itself, hoping to deal damage in their homeland in order to turn the war in the Americas. Unfortunately, the arrival of the French main force meant my defence at Guiana was all for nothing. So, seeing that they had an overwhelming advantage, I abandoned the province and gathered a new army up at the Windward Islands, from where I hope to stage a counterattack once the inevitable fall of Guiana happens.
There is no disgrace the barbaric English will not stoop to, proving yet further that only I can bring civilization to their god-forsaken island. And how telling that they attack the boarding houses before the forts, clearly with nothing but base sins on their minuscule minds. Let's not forget the Dutch, the musket-wielding children who nag Europe for coin while their tantrums spread discord the world over. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been forced to send my soldiers to kill their American conspirators. And if it wasn't for that, there wouldn't be a damned English horde feasting on the wealth of my nation and the delights of my boarding houses. I can't stand the incompetence of my servants for letting this travesty befall our proud and respected countryside. I will have heads rolling, mark my words, be they English, Dutch, or yours. Someone simply has to die before I can ever get a pleasant night's sleep again. And you all know the English and Dutch are out there, but none of you are doing anything about it, are you? Are you? You're the worst bunch of louts a king could ever be cursed with, and I pray daily for a reverse in my fortunes in this regard, I assure you. I'm quite exhausted through my anger, and without the boarding houses, damn it all to hell.
It's France's turn, and of course they storm Guiana right away with their massive army. We've got 2 units inside, one of them just armed citizenry. I auto-resolve, we kill a few of the enemy, but of course we lose the settlement. So that's what we expected. That result was planned for. So at the start of the next turn we get confirmation that army is lost. Now the first thing I noticed was that the wealth of the town has massively increased since when I was occupying it. And it seems that from the intel we have here, it's mostly due to mining. The mining income's gone massively up. The mines themselves are the same. So either France has some sort of technology that I don't have that gives them massive boosts from mining income, or it's just because it's on very hard. But I thought it probably must have been something to do with tech, because the next province over also had the same bonus, and previously that province was worth only a couple of hundred under the French, so they've done something to make themselves very rich, which is unfortunate for us because now they're going to make tons of money off this little region here. Now I have this message, ally attacked. Sweden is for some reason attacking Hanover. And unfortunately, once you open the message, you can't move around to actually go and look at the situation. But luckily, I remembered that Sweden has a massive fleet in Madagascar. So I simply couldn't enter the war because they would wipe out my trade there instantly. So we're going to have to abandon Hanover, unfortunately, in this. We've got a strike there in the Leeward Islands, but that's going to go away soon enough. So now my priority is to try and get Dutch Guyana back. The French army is in the settlement. The navy is too far from the ports in order to defend them. The navy itself is roughly equal to ours, possibly a little bit better, but right now we don't need to engage them. All we need to do is take all of our forces from the Windward Islands, which we gathered up in the last episode, and land them here on the docks. So we're going to dump everyone out into the docks so that on land we now have an army back in the territory that is of roughly equal size to the enemy's army, but unfortunately is based a lot around militia rather than professional units. So the enemy is going to have an advantage in terms of skill, but with General van Nassau leading the army, we will have morale boosts, so the militia won't be all that bad. As for the navy, I was considering attacking the French navy right now, but I decided it's not worth risking it. It's better for me to have this mobile force just to move troops around. I was also able to bring in an additional 5th rate from Curaçao, which was carrying with it 2 units of Light Infantry. A vital addition to the army, no doubt. 2 units will make a big difference in battle. So the fleet's a little stronger, the army's a little stronger. I'm just going to see what France does in response to this. Meanwhile, back in France itself, I've got my little raiding force which can first attack the boarding houses and then move over to the fort. I'm looking around trying to see where the English army is, because England had a full stack of troops in France in the last turn, and now it's not here. Either it's gone into some sort of hidden position, or France got peace with them and they were teleported away. That wouldn't explain why the British are still occupying their ports though, so overall not totally sure what's happening there. Anyway, as you can see, I decided to just besiege Paris and see what the situation looked like. The enemy obviously have a giant numerical advantage. They have a full stack of troops inside, loads of garrison line infantry. Now, we have similar units to theirs in terms of all the stats except morale. With morale, we have a massive advantage, and I thought this looks pretty good because actually a lot of the enemies wouldn't fight in an actual battle. They would retreat after taking a few losses, and my units would last a lot longer. So maybe it is okay to just keep this siege going. I have cavalry advantage as well to stack on top of that. So I thought, you know what, we're just going to besiege Paris and sit here and see what happens. We're going to deny the French income by doing this at the very least, even if no actual military objectives are achieved by doing this. I'm also going to bring up reinforcements from Amsterdam, so if the siege continues, I'll be able to make my army stronger and perhaps even get a force that can assault Paris. Now in the French turn, the Parisians decide they're not going to stand for this. They sally out and attack me. The balance bar shifts a little bit towards the centre because now they're not going to be standing behind their fortifications. Now you'll note interestingly that my general has disappeared. I suspect the French assassinated him with an agent outside the city before this battle started, which is a massive problem for us because the generals are what provide the massive morale boosts that make our army more powerful than the enemy's. But I can't retreat. You can see the option to retreat is actually greyed out. I don't know if that's because of an agent action as well. But of course this means we just have to fight this battle. Let's see what we can do then. No, you mustn't leave. Nothing must change. The enemy will be watching, waiting to see if my loss turns your hearts. But by God, it must not. I have brought you to the gates of Paris. Now it will be up to you to take it. They will come out and attack as soon as the signal of my death reaches them. They will expect you to turn and flee before them. But you will not do that. You will dig your feet into the ground and fill the air with shot and smoke. Let those buggers know that this is not the army of General van Veldeck, but the army of the Netherlands, an army that cannot be crushed. If you can do this, the surprise will be turned on them, and the gates of Paris will lie open. Yes, in this way my death will deliver the enemy's capital to us, a worthy out indeed. So we set up to receive the Parisian attack. I've got my cavalry in hiding on the right flank for now, but I'll move them out in a little bit. And my line is running backwards to be as close to the edge of the map as possible. Of course, I want to stay away from the enemy's artillery fort, both because of the guns on the wall, and more importantly, because of the mortar teams inside. If we make this battle happen anywhere near the fort, they'll bombard me constantly. So we want all of the action to happen right on the edge of the map, and that also gives me a bit of security, because if a unit routes, it will leave the field without taking too many casualties. Now back here, there was a little bit of wall that I wanted to try and exploit. You can see I'm having trouble setting my men up where I want them to. I want them of course to be along the part of the wall facing the enemy, but it seems that where these trees are, that part of the wall isn't able to be used, so my units instead end up forming L shapes facing inconvenient directions. Not too helpful. My strategy here is to form a line with the artillery in the centre. We're going to bombard the enemy with artillery constantly because we know they have low morale, so I want those guns to be firing on the units right at the front at point blank range, so I'm risking the artillery there. My cavalry are just going to sweep out to the extreme flanks and wait for an opportunity to attack the enemy. Right now, we now just have to wait for the enemy to finish forming up before they make their advance. And while I was waiting, I noticed something curious on the minimap. A random enemy unit out ahead of their force. They've sent their artillery team out of the fort and it's rushing towards us for some reason. I don't know if these guys are convicts or something, but they're being sent out to scout our position, it seems, before things get started. And they come across my unit of cavalry sitting on the edge of the map here. They continue to run at me. It seems they intend to go in for battle, so I'm going to allow them the pleasure. My cavalry charge, we meet their charge with overwhelming power, and immediately their artillery team is destroyed. So, not the best start to the battle from the enemy. Not that their artillery was going to be used in this battle, since I'm staying on the edge of the map, but they didn't have to sacrifice the crew. At the very least, if they wanted them to fight in melee, they should have waited. And of course, right after I kill them, I spot a second unit of artillery crew doing the same thing. Oh, Empire AI, you're making life quite easy for me, sacrificing those crew there. Not that it's going to make a huge difference, as I said. So the enemy are starting to actually get information now and advance. You can see they did leave one artillery crew behind in the fort. That's their captain in there, so at least they didn't sacrifice their general. So you can see they formed up into sort of two lines. They're going to attack in two waves, it seems, roughly splitting half their army into each wave. And that's good for me, of course, because it means we're going to have numerical parity once the fighting starts. And if I can beat the first wave in time, we'll still have numerical parity for the second wave. So the enemy come down a hill and start engaging in a line battle with me at maximum range, which is perfect for me. It'll minimize casualties on both sides, but because I know the enemy's morale is low, we're not going to need to kill very many of them to get them to go back up that hill and away. So my units will start firing. Some of them are just out of range, but the enemy are going to come a little bit closer. My artillery are going to play a key role, as I've mentioned, firing really close into the enemy's center and doing damage. My far right flank could be folded in to attack the enemy's center because the second wave was so far away. And you can see I've put my cavalry in a hidden position right in the corner of the map so that the second wave will just pass by them and then I'll come out behind that second wave. As for my other cavalry on the left, I noticed the enemy's armed citizenry were coming for them. I thought maybe I could just engage them because of course those guys are going to have terrible melee stats, we could just charge through them. But then I wanted to try and keep my distance for a moment so that they would fire their volley. Once they fire, you can see it doesn't really do any damage. If I charged them and they'd fired the volley when I was in really close, it might have been deadly and destroyed my morale as well. So we can now charge into melee, and you can see the effect on the center of the enemy's line is already starting to take hold. They're starting to rout with lots of their troops still alive just because they don't like being under artillery fire, even though it's not really doing anything. I've also routed them on my right there, so we're going to fall back and reform the line. Meanwhile, on the left, the enemy sends a militia to fire into the melee between the cavalry and the armed citizenry. This is going to do more damage to me than it is to them, so I need to get out of there. My horses are big targets. We're going to rush off into a forest there in the background, possibly risking coming into range of the enemy's mortar team, but I thought at this distance they probably wouldn't hit me anyway. So we're going to run off, and the armed citizenry are going to give chase. They're very tenacious. I think they were losing the melee combat, but they're eager for more, so they just run after me. See, I'm struggling to make sure my cavalry actually run because of how Empire defaults to walking most of the time. So now back in the main fight, some of the enemy's infantry have advanced in close, which is great for me because this weird L shape now actually has an opportunity to fire on the enemy because they've come in to stand in front of my troops. Very handy. The enemy's second wave is starting to come towards the battle now, so it's time to prepare for that. I'm going to get my cavalry ready for rear attacks and get the right flank in proper formation. Here you can see the cannons in the center sort of need to fire over to their right there because of where the enemy have moved, but they can't really, so they can't hit the closest units to them because my own men are in the way. They're going to have to fire at more distant units. Not going to be quite as effective, but still going to be scary and do the job. Now this unit of line infantry, I realised they can rush onto this wall here and get an enfilade position onto the enemy's centre, so we'll then have basically 3 units all around that central position just firing on the enemy. That's going to do a lot of damage. The enemy's firelock armed citizenry still chasing me there. I told my cavalry to turn around and hit them, and on the other flank we're going to charge some militia with 2 units of cav. That's going to do devastating damage. So right here in the centre, not in the trees because unfortunately my men wouldn't go into the trees, here are my troops firing out at the enemy. The enemy are just falling back. They did not expect this sort of stiff resistance from our position, and when they do fire at me, because we're in a covered position, we won't take many losses. So all is well. My troops arriving there onto the flanking position too late. The enemy already falling back before we could start firing. But the second wave coming in now will provide more targets, and of course the first wave hasn't really lost any men. They've just taken a lot of morale shocks, so they're going to keep coming back, and we're going to start having a cycle in this battle of the enemy always cycling units in and out, which is perfect for me. Here on the far right, those militia who I attacked have been obliterated. They lost more than half their men. My cavalry are relatively fine. We're going to kill a few more of them as they rout just to make sure they don't come back, but they're actually routing off on my side of the battlefield, so they'll leave very quickly. And I spot this unit of line infantry with an exposed rear, so immediately we can cavalry charge them, and you can see I'm basically going to discount them, already moving my infantry as if they weren't there because I'm so confident they're going to be defeated almost immediately. So jumping back over to the cavalry with the Farlock armed citizenry, we're having some real difficulties. They're actually starting to inflict some major casualties on this unit, and this is my captain's unit, so I don't want to lose it. These guys are much more powerful in melee, it seems, than I thought. Even the militia and line infantry go down faster than the Farlock armed citizenry. It seems these Parisians are absolutely passionate not to lose this battle, whilst their professional infantry aren't so much. Anyway, the battle is going fine. In the main fight, where it's not Firelock armed citizenry, I need to do something here though, because the enemy has two units outflanking my flanking unit. Luckily at this moment, they routed. They both routed. They must have caused each other to rout. I think that must be just due to general small arms fire. I didn't see any artillery firing at them, so that's good. I can keep having my flanking position, and more units are taking up place to be hit by them, so that's all fantastic. Finally, my cavalry defeat the armed citizenry and can now make rear attacks on the enemy centre, which we need to stop the cycle of constant routing and the enemy coming back. But actually, the citizenry rout and then come back themselves. They are very tenacious indeed.
We are all here because we took an oath to die for our city. And now, the oath must be honoured before the eyes of all Paris, before the flag of our godly king. It shall be written that on the darkest day of Paris, it was her people who saved her, armed not only with musket and sword, but with all the courage gifted to them by the watchful Lord of Heaven. Let all who witness this day see that fortifications mean nothing, that metal and powder mean nothing, that uniforms and marching drums mean nothing when the strength and spirit of Paris flows through every vein of our bodies. Have no mercy! Kill the invaders! For France and for Paris!
So the Dutch lines are holding. The French keep throwing in wave after wave of troops. We're taking minimal losses though, because they're spending so much time running up and down and getting tired that they're not spending that much time actually firing back at me. So the battlefield is now littered with their dead. My cavalry have really cleared up on the right flank there. You can see another unit routing off the field. They've still got more coming back in, so my cavalry get ready for yet another flank attack. A lot of the enemy's units are now properly routing. They're going to rout all the way to the other side of the battlefield and leave, but there are still a few tenacious ones, including the Farlock armed citizenry. I'm drawing them onto the edge of my line with my cavalry now. We're going to set up an actual firing line to try and receive them properly. We're going to have to treat these guys seriously. Now a tad later, the enemy staged a more major attack on my right flank with some unrouting units, so I had to get out of the way and stage a cavalry attack to break them up. And while I was dealing with that, I got a message saying we had a heroic death. It seems my captain had randomly been hit by a stray shot along with a number of his guards. I think the combat going on in front of him just had some stray shots who missed my troops, went over the top of the line infantry and hit his cavalry, which is really unfortunate. His unit's going to rout off the field. You can see this combat's a little bit awkward. We've got a triangular formation being hit at its point by the enemy's infantry. I decided to try and consolidate something a little bit more sensible, especially because we want to draw those Farlock armed citizenry into open combat and out of those woods where they're probably doing damage to me. So the main fight is so far basically going as planned. Here you can see the last survivors of the French army attempting to battle with my men, but we're in cover. We have artillery support. The Farlock armed citizenry have finally routed. Overall, things now going fine here. I'm going to struggle to get my men onto a flanking position onto that last unit as ever. Very hard to get men into cover in the way that you like in this game, but we're going to try and eventually they succeed. So this battle is pretty much over at this stage. Just a few stragglers to clear up. They stage another attack on the right flank coming through the woods. This time I just told all of my cavalry to charge them and the infantry as well, so everyone piles in against the enemy's vast attacking units under the cover of these trees, taking them out. Fortunately not getting close enough to the fort to take mortar fire, so all is well. So with the enemy routing, we're going to fall back to our original position. And the reason the battle's not over is because of those mortars still in the fort. So theoretically, I now actually have to storm the fort or wait for the time limit on the battle to run out. I had my cannons fire in the general direction of the fort. We can actually hit the wall from where we are, so we could slowly but surely force a breach in the wall with our cannons and then rush up with cavalry and try and get inside. Luckily for me, it didn't come to that because the enemy's mortar team just randomly routed after a while. They had got the health of the wall down. The enemies decided they weren't going to wait to see what happens once the breach was formed, so the battle ends. It's a heroic victory for the forces of the late Van Valdek. Probably a deserved heroic victory. Almost no losses considering the army we just faced, and of course this is very strategically important as a battle. The enemy's losses huge. We probably killed about half of them. There's another battle's worth still in there, so they're probably not going to sally out, but it's still going to be hard for us to get in, but of course we can just maintain the siege now if we want. Now we have another battle. Immediately after this, Van Nassau is attacked by the French army in Dutch Guyana. This is, I guess, what I wanted. We're going to have the defender's advantage, but the enemy army overall is more professional than ours and has artillery advantage in this conflict, so it's not going to be the easiest of fights. This is almost the opposite of the fight we just saw, whereas us, who has the unprofessional force, and the enemy, who has a professional force that's going to have higher morale and to be able to exploit our low morale to negate our numerical advantage. So here's the battlefield. I started off by just running backwards to set up near the edge of the map to get away from the enemy's artillery yet again. Now in this battle it's going to be really chaotic and hard to follow, unfortunately. I ended up playing a lot of the battle on slow motion mode in an attempt to get a balance between having actual shots of the action and being able to stay on top of what's going on. I really hoped I'd be able to use the battle replay for this one, because this is an ideal battle for a battle replay. So much action, and the actual footage of me fighting it is very strategic and doesn't have many close-ups. But unfortunately, this is what the battle replay looked like. It's not even on the same map. It's that different. And you can see it's totally like chugging and stuttering. It was really glitchy. I think because it's a different map, the orders I'm giving are basically messing the game up. And after about 10 seconds of the replay, Empire Total War just crashed the desktop. So this replay was even more broken than I could have imagined, so we're going to have to go with the footage I recorded of me actually fighting it, which you'll see later on. Unfortunately, a lot of it is in slow motion, which means there's no sound effects, which really sucks. We'll consider this an experimental way of presenting the battle and see how it comes out. So, my starting strategy is to fall back and form a line that I'm going to be able to use to support the defensive position on my left. I've got all of my militia positioned along the walls on the left, where they'll be covered from enemy fire, in the hope that they won't take too many losses and will stay in the fight. Meanwhile, the enemy will make their slow advance while the artillery just pounds me. I can't really get out of range of their artillery. It's actually bigger in range than mine, despite being the same unit. Again, they may have higher technology or something to be able to still hit me. They're on stable ground on the road, an ideal firing position, but my men are mostly in cover, so if they fire at those units we won't take too many losses, but overall the enemy are going to have the advantage as the battle starts.
Did you hear that? So loud? I didn't see anything. I think they're fighting at the middle. How can they just stand there or shots set them up? It would be nice to hear our artillery fight for a change. So how long is this going to last? Does anyone see the French? Guess with these hills we won't see them until they're right in front of us. How many of them are there again? They've been marching in the rain all day, right? They aren't going to be able to fight, are they? When they see we've kept our powder dry, they just probably run. Does anyone want to trade places with me?
Reiter, will you shut up?
Oh, sorry sir.
So, as the rain drives on, we prepare our position with the artillery now setting up in front of the line, which is just marching back a little bit. Because of the rain, we're going to have reduced firepower and lots of misfires, which will reduce the rate of fire, which is a real shame because we don't have much in the way of melee, whilst the enemy does, which we'll see a little bit later. You can also see here, we can't hit the enemy's artillery with our own, despite our artillery theoretically being the same model. So we're going to have to content ourselves to firing at their infantry, which is now advancing in a relatively ordered line right towards us. they actually also move up their own artillery a little bit to make it closer, and then the cavalry, which were defending their artillery as they made the start of their advance, suddenly start making a break towards us. They're going full attack. Even their general is out in front of the army. I take a few pot shots at him with my artillery. That doesn't have any effect. Now, it seemed like their cavalry, their lancers, were heading towards my right flank. Luckily, that's where I have my one melee unit, my pikemen. I was investigating the formations they can form. They can do a pike square and a pike wall. The problem with both is they can't move while they're doing it, and it's very unlikely the horses will happen to run into them wherever they stand. So with only one unit, I need to keep them out of formation so I can move them around and be more versatile. Now on the other flank, the enemy began an attack with light infantry ahead of their army. Luckily, the way the hill was positioned meant those light infantry had to get very close before they could fire. I would actually come into my own musket range, so their superior range was not used. The horses looked like they were about to hit the right echelon on the edge of my flank, so I moved my pikes forward, but actually they then turned and they charged across the face of the line. Something that's incredibly dangerous, but because of the rain and the reduced firepower, you can see my men aren't really volley firing, it's just odd shots coming out because everyone's misfiring constantly. So the cavalry are getting away with this basically. They're just rushing across the front, taking a few casualties, but for cavalry, they have very low morale when it comes to being shot at. So you can see they're already wavering now, having only lost a couple of men, just because they're under small arms fire, they don't like it. And luckily for me, they rout before they get in front of my guns, which could have been very dangerous. But right in front of the guns on the infantry side is the enemy's auxiliary warriors, the Native Americans who are a melee unit. And of course, with the rain, they're going to be especially effective because they can just charge in and they won't take many losses on the charge. They've got another melee unit that's about to make an attack as well. It's these pikemen who are attacking over the wall at the militia. So having this wall and planning to just sit here and snipe at the enemy isn't going to happen. The enemy are just going to charge over the wall and engage in melee. A good choice from the AI general because that's going to really help them out. Now I need to pause because things are getting chaotic and I've got a bunch of orders to do. First, we're going to charge down the hill. All of my cavalry here on the top of the hill are going to be able to get behind the enemy's army now and potentially do some damage. As for all of the enemy's melee charges and the general battle, they suddenly have the advantage and there's really not much we can do. All of our troops are very bad in melee. We don't have bayonets, even plug bayonets, available for this battle, and the enemy are just running at us. Even some of their line infantry are just running at us. So all I can really do is damage control. Try and make it so that whenever a melee happens, I'm also firing into it with another unit so I can slowly grind the enemy down. Here those Native American auxiliary jump over the wall and smash into my militia. The militia won't last long at all. You can see I'm trying to pull them out where I've got another unit of militia behind a wall that will support them. So they'll be able to fire at the auxiliaries as my men fall back, but actually my troops rout as they turn to try and get out of there. I'm going to do a similar thing on the other end of the militia's position where I'm going to turn units to fire into this melee, where the pikemen right now are just doing extreme damage to my militia. That unit's going to rout quite shortly as well. My cavalry though can now make an attack. Their general was exposed. He has a unit of lancers behind him, but I thought it was worth the risk of just rushing my cavalry towards the enemy's general because killing him will really help out. We've also won the left flank essentially. The enemy's light infantry have been pushed back, so we can now set up our men on this hill to fire into the flanks of the enemy's centre, supporting the militia, although the militia won't last very long, so they're going to need that support very fast and it's going to need to be very effective. So we managed to get the enemy's general into melee, but he actually instantly ran away. We didn't kill him. His unit ran to the back of the map and my cavalry just chased him. So we'll see more of that action probably next time because that actually became a key part of the fight later on. Meanwhile, the rest of the enemy's army is coming in to engage. On the right flank, we have an advantage actually. I managed to fold around and get a small number of the enemy engaged by a large number of my troops at range, but in the centre and all along the left, we're just being engaged in melee everywhere. Here you can see an unit of lancers charged right through the middle and has smashed some of my line infantry up. Not good. Here you can see where routs have turned most of my militia away, so we now actually are firing onto the back of the enemy's melee units because they're turning around to hit me in the back and I've got a second line ready. On the left flank we're surrounding the enemy a little bit as well. We've got a ranged advantage here, but the enemy are just smashing through in melee and soon everyone's going to descend into melee. I didn't want this battle to be this way, but we're going to have to fight it as it is. We'll see how it continues next time. As midday passed, Nassau saw that his lines were in chaos, and the prospects for a successful counterattack of Guiana were becoming increasingly poor. And with the French in control of the coastal waters, there was nowhere to retreat to if the battle was lost. While Nassau despaired, far from the battle, the fortunes of war were the complete reverse. The siege of Paris, unbroken by the death of General van Veldeck and the attempts of the French garrison to break out, meant that France's military command and supply chains were compromised at their highest level. The war in the Americas would not matter at all if their capital could not be secured, and with their forces fighting distant wars, there was little hope for the beleaguered city. Thanks for watching. We'll fight that battle to its conclusion and see how the war continues in the next episode of Sinews of War.